at the 50th anniversary of the apex of 20th century innovation, the Apollo 11 moon landing. I'm going to try and compete with next door, so bear with me. The Commerce Department has partnered with the agencies of these two gentlemen on many of the topics we'll be discussing today. And I'd just like to make a quick point. We are starting a little bit late. We do have a hard stop at 12:30, so we're going to try to get through some questions. If you have questions and we're not able to get to you, all of us will be here for the next few days, and hopefully we can find each other afterwards. We're fortunate to have two engaging and knowledgeable speakers who have critical responsibilities for ensuring that innovation in aviation will move forward while ensuring that aviation remains safe and accessible. I mentioned Apollo 11, an achievement that electrified the world in 1969, and now 50 years later, the theme of the U.S. Pavilion Mission Hall focuses directly on space and the commercial opportunities that await. This year also marks two other remarkable achievements in aviation: the flight of the first Boeing 747, the Queen of the Skies, on February 9th, 1969, and the first flight of the Anglo-French Supersonic Concorde only a few weeks later on March 2nd. In many ways, these three innovations in aviation and aerospace have defined the following 5 decades for the industry and society. And so, with the 3 50-year anniversaries as a launching pad, our panelists are cleared for takeoff. First, I'd like to introduce David Short, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Aviation and International Affairs at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Appointed to serve in July 2018, he has responsibility for implementing economic and competition policy as it affects the aviation and international transportation sectors. Before joining the administration, David served as Senior Counsel, Trade and International Affairs for FedEx Express, based in Washington, D.C. Prior to FedEx, David served as Director of the International Air Transport Association Legal Department in Geneva and practiced aviation law in Washington. David graduated from Cornell University and received his law degree from the University of Southern California. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Dan Elwell, the Acting Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. Dan's long and distinguished aviation career in public and private service makes him exceptionally qualified to lead the organization responsible for the safety and efficiency of the world's largest aerospace system, a system that operates more than 50,000 flights per day. Prior to this position, Mr. Elwell was the FAA's Deputy Administrator, and he previously served at the FAA as the Assistant Administrator for Policy Planning and Environment from 2006 to 2008. Dan has also held positions at Airlines for America and the Aerospace Industries Association. He was a commercial pilot for 16 years with American Airlines, and Dan is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. Lieutenant Colonel Elwell retired from military service as a command pilot with more than 6,000 hours combined civilian and military flight time in the United States Air Force and the United States Air Force Reserve, including combat service during Operation Desert Storm. Please welcome Dan and David. And David, let's start with your thoughts on how the Department of Transportation is guiding transportation technology in the U.S. government.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for attending today. At the Department of Transportation, we're guided by 3 fundamental pillars that have been set by our Secretary, Elaine L. Chao. The first, of course, is safety. Safety above all else in everything we do at the Department of Transportation. The second is infrastructure, and the third is innovation. So I'm very happy to have the opportunity to be here today to talk about aviation. One thing Secretary Chao has said that I am convinced she's absolutely right about this. We are all going to witness more innovation in the next 5 years than we've seen in the last 50 years. We have just heard we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of several milestones in our industry. But when you think back 50 years ago, people were more or less driving the same cars. We were flying, as was just said, the 747, which is still one of the biggest aircraft that we're flying today. Not a whole lot has fundamentally changed in the last 50 years, but just think about what is coming in the next 5 years. I had the great privilege a couple of weeks ago to go for my first ride in a self-driving car. And it was in Las Vegas. It was not on a test track. It was on the Strip on Las Vegas Boulevard, which is one of the busiest 8 or 10 lane roads in the United States. And I will confess, the self-driving car did a better job than I could do myself if I were driving the car. I felt totally safe. I'm now a fan. I can see in the next 5 years, self-driving cars are going to be a lot more prevalent than they are today. In our world of aviation, we're looking at drones absolutely growing exponentially. And I know a little bit later into this program, Dan and I will get into more detail in what's going on with drones. Supersonic aircraft. I think some of you who may have seen the opening ceremonies an hour or so ago, I don't think that high-performance fighter jet was flying supersonic, but it was certainly making a lot of noise, and I bet it could fly supersonic if it needed to. Well, we've got at least 4 companies in the United States that are working on supersonic for commercial aviation to get us around the globe faster than is possible today. And so, again, I'll just wrap up in answering your question. We are on the cusp of so many exciting innovations that when we come back, I guess this show is done every 2 years, so not 5 years, but maybe in 6 years some of us will be back here. Aviation is really going to be in a very different place, and all for the good.
Great. Thank you, David. Now I'd like to turn it over to Dan for his view on innovation in aerospace and aviation from the FAA.
Thank you very much. And it's really great to be back in at Paris and the Paris Air Show. And I agree with David. Fundamentally, innovation is a plant that needs constant watering. And I grew up in traditional aviation, but we're looking at an entirely new and different airspace system today and moving forward. And if you want to be ready as an organization, you've got to be planning well in advance for what's coming down the road. Drones, commercial space, supersonic, all mentioned already. We have to be prepared. But none of this comes as a surprise to anybody who comes to the Paris Air Show. In the case of drones, we've contoured our business model to accelerate integration. We created a new office. We hired the best and brightest to work and run that office. We have regular meetings every week to check and double check our progress towards integration. All of the players for integration for drones are at the table: rulemaking, flight standards, aircraft certification, air traffic, legal, international policy, all have to come together to make our policy plan for drone integration work. And we're making sure we don't overlook anything. Commercial space. That offers the same chance for success and the same complexities. We just hired Brigadier General Wayne Monteith this past year, who was commander of the 45th Space Wing in the Air Force for 3 years, and during that time, he commanded the busiest spaceport in the world for the U.S. Air Force. That's a great hire. And we have an office designed just to make sure, like drones, that our effort is coordinated for commercial space. U.S. Congress supports our efforts in both commercial space and drones. I think there's something like 100+ pages devoted in the last FAA bill toward drones in one way or another. So back to commercial space, 2018 was a record year, which followed a record year in 2017. We had 33 successful commercial launches, up from 21 in 2017. We have as many as 41, possibly as many as 45 commercial launches for 2019 on the calendar. So launch rates and mission complexity are increasing in commercial space. As already mentioned, and also one more thing about commercial space, the best part of this growth in commercial space, the launch schedule and the complexity, is we're improving safety as we do it, which for commercial space has always been an issue. But we're getting safer while we're adding ops, and that's very important. Supersonic aircraft, if you've heard, are back. They're back on the horizon. Traditional manufacturers, startups, investors are developing innovative technologies and solutions to deploy commercially viable supersonic aircraft on a larger scale than in the past. Supersonic travel holds promise for significantly reducing travel time and thereby opening up opportunities for business, economic, and aviation growth. Of course, we still have to deal with the noise issue. The startups and the entrepreneurs and the innovators understand that. And the important thing is, and I'll check, Chris, I don't know if we just dropped that NPRM or we're going to, Earl, on the streamlining for supersonic. But we are putting out a notice of proposed rulemaking to streamline the process for supersonic testing approval. Very important for the innovation to come. So we're believers. We want to be enablers. The United States, Secretary Chow, and the President are committed to working both domestically and internationally to foster this reintroduction of supersonic innovation and enable the return of supersonic travel while ensuring that the environmental impacts are understood and properly addressed. And we recognize that development and deployment of these new aircraft will be of international interest. Thus, we are encouraging development of technical guidelines and eventually standards through ICAO. We had a great conversation about supersonic at CAPE in the last CAPE meeting in February. A lot of progress made. Finally, I just want to say a couple seconds. What we're doing in the FAA, we're creating an Office of Innovation. And the Office of Innovation is going to be designed to serve as the gateway organization for new ideas through which industry can funnel their out-of-the-box thinking. And because of that, we want the Office of Innovation in the FAA, once it's created, to be an out-of-the-box thinking organization that gets new ideas ready for integration into our NAS, the National Airspace System. It's very important that entrepreneurs and innovators and new thinkers have a place to go. In the past, it hasn't always been clear to startups and new entrants of where they need to go in the FAA. In the future, we'll have an organization designed to assimilate new ideas and get them ready for introduction into the rest of but the important thing about this innovation, this innovation incubator, as I like to call it, is to understand what it's not. It's not going to be an R&D office. It's not going to do basic research and development on new technologies. It's not going to replace the role of our other FAA organizations on their basic missions, and it is not going to play a role in directing current operations. We're very well structured for that. So with that, sorry I talked so long. Here you go.
No, thank you very much, Dan. There's a lot happening, a lot to talk about, and I think you both were here for Secretary Ross's comments, my boss, and you could see from him and talking to him yesterday and today just how important commercial space is, and I think that's probably a good starting point for us. And so I guess I'd like to start off by asking you, Dan, the theme of the U.S. Pavilion is commercial space. Can you discuss the latest developments above and beyond what you just discussed on commercial space transportation in the U.S.? Is the industry itself growing?
So the industry, the commercial space industry in the U.S. is growing. We're all familiar with the high-profile new entrants like Blue Origin and SpaceX and the work they're doing, but there are dozens and dozens of other commercial space companies that are doing really cool things. We have on the horizon space tourism. We have the U.S. is going to get back to transporting astronauts to and from the space station on a commercial basis. There's so much that can be done, but what we're working on is a streamlining our regulations for commercial space licensing, and we produced an NPRM to that effect in basically record time under the direction of the Space Council, which is led by Vice President Pence. That regulation, once we get the comments and we adjudicate the comments and we write the rule, is going to make it much more easy and accessible to licensed launches in the U.S. from a commercial basis. And the whole idea is we don't want to over-bureaucratize the process for these new companies. We want to get commercial space launch pace to a place where eventually, someday in the future, refine it to a point where we can basically these companies can file and fly, sort of like legacy carriers do today. But commercial space is exciting. There's a lot of things we have to do. We're working with Commerce on SSA and STM. There is a lot of legislation that is guiding our efforts in commercial space. But I'm sure NASA will have during the show plenty to say about their plans. But what a great opportunity to talk about the excitement of commercial space in the U.S. on the 50th anniversary of walking on the moon.
And for both of you, if either one of you care to add anything as we go along, please do so. Just grab the mic before I touch it. Thanks for getting into that and talking about the proposed rule. Before we touch on drones, I don't know if maybe David, you have any thoughts on what's next for commercial space, how the department might accommodate this industry going forward?
Right. Well, I think Dan covered it very well. Of course, my office at the Department of Transportation, the Office of Aviation and International Affairs, is responsible for the economic regulation. And so I think the same principles that we've applied over the decades in regulating aviation up to this point will be applied to commercial space as it develops. And of course, we'll be guided, as in practically everything we do, by, again, safety above all, privacy concerns, and security.
Great, thank you. And then sticking with you, David, what is the U.S. doing to enable the development and adoption of new technology?
Right, well, let me take the example of what's going on with drones. I think drones is an incredibly exciting area. Really, the centerpiece of our initiative on drones is the IPP, the Integration Pilot Program. And this consists of 9 different experiments all over the country, from the East Coast, Virginia and North Carolina, a number of projects in the heartland states, North Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Nevada, and Alaska. And each project is different. Each project shows the incredible promise that drones have to make all of our lives easier and better. A lot of people, when they hear about drones, they think of package delivery. And I think that's certainly going to be a big part of it. And some of the IPP experiments focus on package delivery. But there are so many others. In the medical area, one thing I learned working on drones is that 20% of the kidneys that are donated for transplant end up having to be discarded because of delays in transportation, that they're sent by road, the transport gets caught up in traffic, they get caught up at red lights just getting from one hospital to another across town. 20% of these scarce kidneys that have the possibility to improve people's lives and even save people's lives have to be discarded because of delays in transportation. That is not acceptable. We are going to use drones, and it's already happened in Baltimore, Maryland, within the last couple of months, was the first successful use of a drone to transport a donated kidney from the hospital where it was harvested to another hospital where the recipient of the donated kidney was waiting to receive it. So that's an example of how all of our lives are going to be made so much better once we can use drones to replace terrestrial transport. Another example I've become familiar with, this is kind of a fun one, I think. In Oklahoma, they have a terrible problem with these feral hogs, with wildlife that does $2 billion a year of damage to the crops. So what they have to do now is human beings have to carry these heavy bales of bait, and there's no roads to where the traps are. So people have to walk carrying multiple 10-pound bales of bait to put in the traps for the wildlife. Well, why should a human being have to do that in 2019? This really difficult, unpleasant work when you can get a drone that will hover over the trap, drop in with the bait, lift back up, move on to the next trap, drop some more bait there, freeing human beings from having to do this difficult work. It will enhance the lives of the people who have to do that now. In Alaska, drones are being used to inspect the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. Again, an inaccessible piece of infrastructure. And you know what? The drones have the capability, they have technology to detect methane. So if there's a leak in the pipeline, the drone can detect it, whereas a human being, even if they could get to that stretch of pipeline, could not detect it. In Memphis, at the Memphis airport, drones are being used to inspect the fuselages of aircraft, saving human beings from the time-consuming and somewhat difficult task of climbing up on ladders to do that. And again, the technology in the drone is better than any of our human eyes at detecting defects in the fuselages of aircraft. So we're getting better quality output, we're saving money, and we're freeing up people to do more enjoyable and more productive things than they're having to do now. One other thing I'll say about drones. Drones and conventional aircraft, at least as I see it, have one thing in common. They both fly through the national airspace. But I would say the similarities pretty much end there, right? For aircraft, they take off and land at a very finite number of airports. They normally fly somewhere around 30,000 feet or above. Drones usually don't operate above 400 feet. They have no need for airports. They can take off at a supermarket, at a shopping center, to and from any of our homes. So it's a very different profile, a very different mission. And the job of integrating drones into the national airspace system is a challenge we haven't had to confront before. It's not simply hiring more air traffic controllers to manually control drones the way we control conventional aircraft today. It's almost certainly going to be an automated system because of the number of operations involved, and it's simply a different mission, really a different task, controlling aircraft flying always below 400 feet. I'll just say when we do it through this automated system, there will be no compromise, no question of compromising safety. We need to be assured, and I hope Dan may have his own comments on this, but if it is not safe, we will not allow it to happen. So it is going to be safe, but it will be done in a very different way than the conventional air traffic control. It will also have to respect the concerns of security and privacy.
Thanks. Dan, do you have anything else to add?
No, that David's exactly right. And that's a great summary of what's going on. The only thing I would add is, while Part 107 was written to as a guidance tool for small drone operations, and he's correct. They're smaller. They're below 400 feet. The important thing is, right from the beginning of drone regulations in our country, we are going forward with the premise that drones will be integrated, not segregated. Even the small drones flying below 400 feet, we understand it's an integration issue because we have other manned vehicles below 400 feet all over the country. They're called helicopters and crop dusters and lots of other things. So right from the beginning, we're not interested in segregation because eventually drones will get bigger and their operations will become more complex and they will be mixed into the national airspace system. So we have to get integration right from the beginning. And that's part of what complicates things, but it's also, once we get it right, it's going to liberate drone operations because they'll be able to go anywhere an airplane today can go.
All right, thanks Dan, David. That's, for me, very fascinating. I oversee supply chain at ITA and Commerce, so drones are really important to us in drone technology. Before we move on to another issue of interest to me and probably to you guys, Supersonic Transport, which being on Tin Can twice a week I think about how nice that will be to experience. Maybe Dan, do you talk to us a little bit about the Boeing 737 MAX? Obviously, a lot of attention in recent weeks and months. Can you provide us with the latest on the aircraft?
So we are making steady and good progress, both on the investigation continues, but the FAA's role is continuous airworthiness, continuous operational safety oversight that we are responsible for. We continue to work very, very closely with our international partners on getting the safety case to lift the prohibition. Eventually, the 737 MAX will fly, but it won't do so until we have complete confidence in the safety of continued flight of the MAX. So a couple of things that have happened recently. I invited the states of registry around the world and the states who had written prohibitions on 737 MAX flying to come to the U.S. so that the FAA, the state of design, could brief all countries that are interested in the 737 MAX situation. We gave them a full day's briefing on all of the work we've done so far, all of our findings, what we plan to do going forward. And it was a very, very positive and productive meeting. These countries were very engaged. They asked a lot of questions, and we gave them a lot of answers. So going forward, it's critically important that first, the 737 gets back in the air safely, and that we've mitigated any risks that we found for grounding the 737 MAX. And secondly, that the traveling public worldwide has the level of confidence that they need to get back on the 737 MAX. So those are our two fundamental goals, safety being obviously the most important goal, but I think public confidence is important too. So we're working towards that.
Okay. Well, thank you. And then now really for the final subject that I have and wanted to bring up before we might have time for one or two questions from the audience. We're starting to hear more and more about the possible resurgence of supersonic transport. What can you tell us about the sector, David?
Well, again, I think it's a really exciting area of aviation. We have at least 4 companies in the United States that have embarked on very serious projects to develop commercial supersonic aircraft, each one a little bit different. I guess the biggest challenge is how to deal with the noise, not the sonic boom, that's another issue, but the noise on takeoff and landing. And we have never had regulations for takeoff and landing noise for supersonic aircraft in the United States. When we had Concorde, we knew the noise profile of the aircraft, and we gave that specific aircraft an exemption. We never developed regulations, so we really have nothing. We have the Concorde waiver that was granted 50 years ago. We have nothing else. We have regulations for subsonic aircraft noise, none for supersonic aircraft noise. So that is the challenge. Now, many of us who live in urban areas live close to the flight paths of airports that may be served by these aircraft. The good news is the noise that we expect will be produced by the supersonic aircraft currently under development, the noise in decibels is no more than the noise produced by commercial transport aircraft currently in service, for example, the 777-300. The issue is, because of the way the Stage 3, Stage 4 noise standards have rolled out, a larger aircraft can generate more noise in decibels than a smaller aircraft. The supersonic aircraft are going to be smaller. Therefore, under the traditional way of thinking, the regulation would say they need to make less noise. Well, some of them may not make that much less noise to qualify under the regulations that currently apply to subsonic aircraft. But if I'm living under a flight path, I don't really care about the size of the aircraft. I care about the decibels that may disrupt my barbecue or wake me up early in the morning. And as long as the supersonic aircraft are not generating more decibels than aircraft that are flying every day today that we're all used to, I would hope that we can find a way forward to accommodate this very promising technology, which, as was mentioned, for those in the room who may be road warriors, will really cut down on the amount of time you need to be away from your family and friends, and may make possible trips that are not possible today. Maybe there's an important meeting that someone on the East Coast of the U.S. would like to participate in Europe. But if it means an overnight flight and then an 8-hour flight back to the East Coast, it's just not worth it. It's just not possible. That's business that may not get done. But if it's 3 hours over, 3 hours back, in some cases, maybe it's a day trip, just like people do day trips from the East Coast to the West Coast sometimes in the United States. That's going to create tremendous opportunities for further economic growth above and beyond the aviation sector. So supersonic, I think, has tremendous promise. It looks like it can be done without more noise in decibels than all of us are used to today, generated by subsonic aircraft. So let's hope we can get some sort of a global consensus that this benefit for all of humanity is really worthwhile and something we need to put our heads together and, again, come to a consensus to make it possible. Dan, do you have anything to add?
Thanks, David. Yeah. The only thing I'd add is the noise issue is going to be paramount. That's clear. We, though, as regulators, have got to be enablers. We cannot put up a regulatory construct that makes it impossible just to get through the paperwork or just to get through the testing process. We need to be able to create an environment where innovators can come and innovate, and that they're able to come up with the solutions that can then turn into what David was describing. It's an airplane that takes off with normal airplane noise and then gets up high and breaks the sound barrier with a puff instead of a boom, and then people can get to business in half the time or less. And one of the big challenges for the techno geeks is the solution that we've done the past 30 years is high bypass engines for takeoff. The more bypass on takeoff, the better. So what they're actually coming up with is an engine that's a variable bypass. It'll be high bypass for takeoff and a constricted bypass at altitude to break the sound barrier, and at the same time be more fuel efficient. So that's real exciting stuff. And my only goal as the regulator is that it passes the safety case, improves safety, and we don't become the blocker, we don't become the hindrance to the movement of this technology.
Well, and if I could just add on Dan's last point, I think that's very important to this administration. We want the United States to be the most hospitable, the most welcoming jurisdiction in the world for innovation. And we're seeing an awful lot of that, and it's really in our DNA. I mean, we are, not to brag, but our country is the home of Silicon Valley. We gave the world, for better or worse, companies like Google and Amazon and Uber and so many more. And we are committed in this administration to making sure that carries over into aviation. We have been in the forefront of this industry since the Wright brothers, and we're not going to cede that leadership now for any reason.
Great, thank you guys. I think we've got time for maybe one or two questions, but we're really competing with next door on the sound, and so so maybe if we can take just one or two questions, we might break and can answer anything individually.
I have a question. We talk a lot about supersonics, but autonomy is upon us, especially for. Can you hear me? Autonomy is upon us, especially for small aircraft. When do you see a regulation addressing autonomy, autonomous airplanes? My question, when do you see a regulation addressing autonomous airplanes, small autonomous airplanes, pilotless without any pilots.
When do we see the? It's timing on the innovation for small autonomous vehicles.
So, Mike, obviously you mean not small, but autonomous aircraft in the NAS, not small drones. Yeah. But small aircraft larger than small drones, because they're already going in the NAS. So I don't know. I'm looking at Earl, and Earl is in the audience. He led the Office of UAS for about 5 years or so before you gave it up. But he's still going to have to face your question. You know, the interesting thing about drones now is that we have a regulatory roadmap. Carriers can come in, operators can come in, and they can now apply for drone certification of Part 23, Part 21, and they can also, and they are looking for Part 135 certification, and they're going for economic approval through David's shop. So all of the regulatory construct is in place. There are, of course, a couple of things that we have to do that, as we've said, that David said that are special, right? So we have an NPRM for drone flight over people and at night. Then there's, of course, the holy grail of drone regulations, which is beyond visual line of sight. We hope to have that out in the fall. So we're really moving, I think, for us, for FAA, we're moving rapidly on the regulatory construct. But the cool thing about things like 135 authority, we're using the 135 reg for drone applications. We're just tailoring it to fit an unmanned operation. So now, the core of your question, when do I see like a unmanned 172, flying around? That I'm not going to give a date to that. Again, my pat answer is when we think it's safe to do so, and we can approve the applications, that's when it'll happen. That's a good answer. Yeah, the operators, the industry, and the FAA will probably be ready for it before the public. And when I say before the public, operations, an unmanned aircraft with passengers, right? I think an unmanned aircraft for delivery is going to be accepted, pretty soon.
Great. I'm not sure if they're done next door. But we could do one more question, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
Thank you for your speech. My name is David. I just would like to know how could you apply in transportation the famous sentence, America first?
Well, I think I touched on that a moment ago in my comment that America first means making America the most hospitable country in the world to attract the innovation we've been talking about. That if you want to develop supersonic aircraft or drones or any of the things we've been talking about this morning, we want you to come and invest in the United States. And we're going to create we have created under the current administration a regulatory environment which never compromises safety, because I'm sure any serious entrepreneur that wants to succeed doesn't want compromised safety. That's the surest way, in my opinion, to failure. There may be some short-term advantages, but for the long term, you want the maximum safety. We will never compromise safety. We will not compromise security, and we will not compromise privacy. But beyond that, we want to do everything we can to cut regulations and to make the U.S. attractive for investment in innovation. When President Trump came into office just over 2 years ago, he gave us a mandate. Every time a federal agency wants to adopt a new regulation, we have to get rid of 2 existing regulations, right? 2. How can we do that? A lot of people thought we need every single one of the regulations we have. Well, let me say, in the Department of Transportation, that's been an easy target, to meet. We have surpassed that. I don't know, Dan, isn't it more like 10 or 20 regulations we've gotten rid of for every one new regulation that we've promulgated? Another example, within the last couple of months, we're very pleased. My office gave economic authority to the Google subsidiary Wing Aviation, to do small package delivery with drones. If you want to start a new air carrier carrying packages, you want to be the next UPS or FedEx, you're going to need to come back with a set of exhibits that thick. You're going to pay, I don't know how much money to the lawyers and the consultants. It's a very expensive process. If you want to run drones in a neighborhood on demand, you certainly need to prove you can do it safely, but you don't need to go through all the hoops of the economic regulation that you would if you wanted to be a global cargo airline. So instead of requiring the same application we would require of UPS, we have a 2-page form. That's what Google could afford the lobbyists and the lawyers and the consultants, but we said, here's a 2-page form, you fill it out, we'll do our due diligence and make sure you filled out the form correctly, and we will then validate it, stamp it. Literally, we stamp it, give it back to Google, and they are now licensed to operate a drone package delivery service. So that's an example of how our administration, and I'm very proud to be a small part of this, how we're cutting through regulation and making it easy for entrepreneurs to succeed with their ideas, I have to say once again, without any compromise to safety, security, and privacy.
Oh, David, thanks for that question. I would tell you, when it comes to aviation, the term America First, what America First means is getting our house in order first, right? Safety, enabling technology, enabling innovation. But America First does never, when it comes to aviation, never means America alone. Everything that we've done in aviation, almost since its inception, has been a collaborative effort, both internally here in the U.S. between the regulator and the operators, to ensure that we're sharing safety information top to bottom in everything we do. But as aviation became internationalized, we have partnered with countries all around the world. We have now dozens of bilateral aviation safety agreements. We have over 100 technical agreements with countries all over the world, all designed really for one purpose, and that is to lift the safety bar all over the world, and that's what we'll continue to do.
All right, great. I think we're about out of time. As I said, both David and Dan will be here the next few days, so please grab them if you have any additional questions. But thank you for joining us. Thank you, David and Dan, for sharing. Very much appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of the week.